Hi, and welcome to the Spotted Dog Game Farm. We're a tiny homestead located in central Appalachia. Our goals here are to raise our children with an affinity for the land, to work so that all people may feel welcome to exist in their own space, and to remove the gatekeeping and mystery around small-scale farming. The purpose of this video is to cover the gory details of handling shrink-wrap chicks, those being chicks who are unable to complete hatching because their shell membrane has dried enough that they can no longer zip through it. This video does contain footage of blood and the internal workings of eggs at hatch time. If you are uncomfortable with that, then please don't watch. All but one of the chicks we unzip in this video survives the experience, and all would have perished without intervention. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope this video demystifies this process for you. I'm going to attempt to film this by popular request today, but please know that I am by myself today, and this room is a mess. The reason that this happened this way was because two reasons. Number one, I missed my notification, my reminder to go into lockdown. And all my birds this year have been hatching one day early. So I turned my lockdown notification up a day and then promptly missed it. So whatever. When I opened it to put them into lockdown, actually a day late instead of a day early, I already had pips. And here we are. So trying to figure out how to hold the camera. Anyway, you can see we have leaks peeking through. As you pull these birds out, this is way more shrinks than I usually have, but this hatch was kind of wild. Sometimes it'll be just a tiny little hole, so tiny little bitty guy, and sometimes it'll be again a tiny little hole, and sometimes it'll be a partial zip. You want to check them if they're alive before you try to do this. And at some point there's a judgment call. So if they're just barely tinted, for example, this one is barely even tinted. He's just got a little tiny pyramid. It is entirely likely that I could mist this egg and put it back in there and it'd be okay. The challenge with these is that I had to take the basket out for a while, and it's definitely shrinking out because of how long the basket needed to be out. So just to get the actual hatch chicks out. My success rate on this is usually between 80 and 90%. It really depends. So I don't know. I'm going to stop this video and probably start it again because I need to figure out something to hold the camera. Okay. It's being held up by my very temporary button quail brooder. So let's see if I can show this. So the real challenge here is when they're already partially zipped like this. You can see as we start to peel this egg open, you can see how that membrane is really stuck to the chick. So inside the egg, that membrane is kind of just like the placenta, kind of just like the amniotic sac, really, of a human baby. In this case, this chick is out enough. So you see right there, there's this like, I don't know if it'll focus or not. There's kind of a skin here. I can peel it off. That's dried to the egg. This one is not super tightly shrunk, but that's the problem. That's what we want to prevent. The trick is twofold. One, that when the chick is zipping, it's cutting its way around the egg. Once it gets the zip done, it's squirming around in there and it's turning that egg, and eventually it winds up like this. Imagine that the egg was whole and I hadn't just opened it. It develops its leg strength by pushing out of the egg. If they don't get to push, you're gonna have problems. So if possible, I like to leave them at this stage to continue hatching on their own. Gonna move to one that's much less zipped now. This stage, or even that tent stage can be really dangerous because there's barely a hole here. They can barely breathe. So I said before, I like to use a precision screwdriver. This one's pretty small. And the reason I like to do this is because I can see his little beak poking out. He's trying to zip, but you can see, I don't know if you can see, this membrane right here is basically hard for this chick now. There's no way it's ever gonna cut out of there. So you see how that's like a solid skin? They're probably not gonna be able to zip that unless it's a super hardy bird. Just a super vigorous bird. So, forewarning, it is not unheard of that there is blood, because they are still absorbing their yolk sac at this point. So you see that one down there is pushing out. What you definitely don't want to do is pull it out of that egg. I'm going to pause this for a second since that one can breathe. And I'll show you down here. Do you see that it's still attached to the egg sac in there? So if we pull that out, there's a great likelihood that we cause that bird to bleed or cause it to lose that last bit of nutrition, which we don't want to do. So we're going to let him go and see how he is in a minute before we decide where he's going to go. 9 times out of 10 from here, they'll go back in the brooder. I'm actually back in the incubator with the lockdown humidity up. So see that shell? This one's a little more liquid because the egg wasn't nearly as open. And you can see, I think this is interesting because you really get to see how tightly packed they are in there. There's his little head right there. And there's where he was doing his little zip. So the challenge is with leaving them in there to push is that membrane, any membrane that is lower than what you tear, will turn solid and they won't be able to get out of it. It will turn solid on them and stick to them and be a problem. So we got him the same point. There is a little bit of blood. We're going to let him go and see how he does. Pulled himself out. His egg sac was already mostly, or her egg sac was already mostly separated, so that's good. Let's move on to this one. Similar situation. Remember that they're going to be heads up at the fat end of the egg, so pointy end, fat end. This is why you store and hold with the fat end up. So I'm just going to use this to just barely get under the edge of the egg. Barely get under there. We don't want to touch the chick. We only want to touch the membrane and the shell if possible. That was not bleeding because I poked it. That was bleeding from residual blood inside the shell. I think in general, a lot of times people assume that chicks are a lot less resilient than they are, a lot less tough than they are. So you see that that's really, this is what it looks, this is what you really want it to look like. The challenge is now that because we've exposed it to the air, it's going to dry very rapidly. Most animals, particularly farm animals, see it, that is a shrink wrap for sure. You see how it changed color along the edges? It's wet, and then the white is where it shrink wrapped, and that's right along the top of the air sac, so it's not super surprising that it would go there. It's pretty graphic. I apologize if that's a hard thing for you, but I do feel strongly if you can't deal with the graphic nature of raising, protecting, keeping these animals safe, then you really probably shouldn't have them. It's not that nature is cruel, it's that nature doesn't care. And if you care, you need to be able to get in there. And if you don't care, well, I guess whatever. But so this one might have been an early help. Maybe I should have let him try a little longer. You can see here, this is his yolk sac folded up by his head. His head is still folded in here. I'm going to go ahead and free his head because that part, if that dries, you're in trouble. Never going to be able to get out, never going to be able to stretch his legs out. Probably going to have to monitor this chick more closely. A lot of people, if they get eggs at the stage that this one was at, or just that tent stage, they will just mist and put it back in there. This chick is going to have a much harder time making it than either one of these two who is currently going strong. I'm probably going to save that tent egg for now. Let's see where we are. This is the stage again. This is a chick that probably isn't going to suffocate. He's still alive. Give him a little tap. I guess what I was saying about how resilient they are is that you can't shake them, right? You can't be rough. You can't be unintentionally cruel, or intentionally cruel, I guess. But the option if you don't do this is that they're going to suffocate and die in their shell, which makes me feel super bad when that happens because they made it all the way through being laid, they made it all the way through being selection, they made it all the way through incubation, they made it all the way through all the things that can happen in incubation. They didn't get a bacterial infection, they didn't get whatever. They were resilient enough to get all the way here, and then they struggled for whatever reason. Maybe you opened the incubator too fast, maybe you did whatever you did, maybe you didn't, maybe you had a power outage, maybe maybe the genetics just weren't that good and they didn't have what it took to get out. They didn't have enough energy, whatever. a few things that I think about modern incubation practices that kind of go in the face of some of the common wisdom is that I think that most people incubate with too much humidity. I think you should be incubating with less humidity where possible. I think in the 35 to 45% range is really where you want to be. This one's barely a 10. We're going to save that one, put it back in there, monitor it. This one, okay, didn't make it through. I'm going to actually start to open this one off camera in case this check is already moved on. I will continue to talk to you though. I think that people incubate with too much base humidity in the first 18 or so days, and then they turn the humidity too high in the last few days. So personally, I usually incubate between 35 and 45% for base incubation, really never above there. And then I turn it up to about 60 to 65% in the final days. What I also really want to point out, especially if you are hatching your own eggs, or even if you are importing eggs, this chick was actually okay. He's probably going to make it. What I really want to point out is that if you are importing eggs, you need to consider the ecosystem of the place where you are ordering those eggs from and match that. Those chicks are coming from chickens that are used to that environment, and their bodies are adjusted to lay eggs in that environment. If you are hatching your own eggs, you need to think about what your own environment is here and what time of year it is. We live in the central Ohio Valley. It's super humid here pretty much all the time. So, except for this time of year, we've been averaging about 35%. But you want to be that or less. It is always going to be more humid under a chicken. But the big thing in those early days is that the chicken needs to be able to off-gas CO2 as it starts to respirate, and it needs to be able to transpire moisture, water out of the shell, liquid out of the shell. So he's going to push, he's going to push, he's going to push. We're going to put him back in here. Nope, egg fell off. Egg sac separation or yolk sac separation. Not yolk sac separation yet. I'm sure there are going to be people who fuss about this. There's a lot of folks who think that if they can't get out on their own, that you shouldn't continue those genetics, and really it depends to me on what you are doing with the bird and why it shrunk. If it shrunk completely independently of anything else, that might be the case. If it's the only one, that might be the case. If it's a show bird or you're going to sell them as show quality birds, then and it happened independently, then probably the case that you should let nature take its course. If you are operating an operation for food, especially for yourself, to me it's worth trying to save them, right? These are all American breasts. They're part of a much larger hatch. We've been really successful with them this year. So these guys right now are cold. None of them, so you see how this one is drying, kind of sort of looks like a frizzle a little bit. That's because he's got membrane and liquid stuck to his fur, or not fur, sorry, his feathers, his pin feathers. So we're going to take this group and we're going to put them back in the incubator, which is currently at lockdown. I have a hatching time CT120, currently set to 65% humidity, but it's currently at 71% humidity. We're going to get them back in here and get them warm, and then probably within 6 or 8 hours, they're all going to be on their feet and doing fine. With the possible exception of this one, who we might have to give a little bit more help to. I'm going to help him just a little bit more, because do you see how that membrane is sticking to him or her? We don't want that, because if that membrane sticks, it can also prevent them from being able to stand up later. And almost yolk sac separation. And that's really the other issue, is if they come out and they have membrane stuck to them, it makes it so they can't stretch their legs out, or it makes it so they can't walk. And then you get leg problems, or nutrition problems. They can't get to food, they can't get to water. In a minute, I'll show you a chick that was shrink wrapped, that did survive. And that's not a wound, that's just a little bit of membrane stuck to his head. So I'll I'll gather the video here in a second, then we'll get these posted up. I hope this has been helpful. I'm sorry for the gore. I have a lot of big feelings about what you should and should not be willing to do to help your animals, and when you should or should not be in this game. So I probably will offend some people with that. Apologies if you're offended. You're also not going to change my mind. Thanks. So as promised, here is a chick that was previously quite shrink wrapped. Now, normally I would never keep them on a slippery bottom thing. This was just for the case of this video. I like to keep them on drawer liner or puppy pads. So this chick hatched last evening or so, and was helped out, and you can see that it kind of looks like a frizzle, and that's just because there is membrane and liquid that dried to its feathers in the incubator as it dried off. And so what we want to do is help it get that off of there, because it needs that fluff to stay warm. The brooder's warm. Eventually it'll wear off if you don't do this, but it's kind of a security policy. If it's really cold outside, if you're hatching or your house isn't warm, especially if your de-shrinking process, if your saving the process took longer than you intended, rinsing them off can be a method to get them warm quickly. I don't know that I'm really going to be able to film this part super well because I'm by myself and I don't have a way to hold the camera by the sink. But in general, you're going to turn your sink on, not blasting, but you want there to be a decent amount of water. And you want it to be in that 99.5 to 100 degree range if possible. That should feel to a human like very slightly warm to the touch. So we're not going to cook it, we're not going to make a poached chick, and we're not going to freeze it. If you get that water lower than about 90, you're going to cause it problems. So better to be on the slightly warmer side than the slightly colder side, but you're also not going to, keep them under there for a while. I would say this whole process shouldn't take more than about 15 seconds for the bird. And you're going to want to pre-set up your approach back to your incubator or your heated brooder, whatever it is, so that as soon as you get this wet bird out of the water, you can get it back in the incubator as quickly as possible, or the brooder, whatever you have. I didn't say it before. The reason that I prefer to deal with shrink-wrapped birds in the incubator, number one, is that they weren't quite ready to hatch, right? They were close. They were trying to come out, but sometimes that process can take 48 hours. And they weren't there when they got shrink wrapped, right? So they need to have that temperature. The other thing is the incubators, for the most part, unless you're using a very old style incubator, have forced air, and that forced air is going to help them dry, and it's going to keep that air from developing hot pockets or cold pockets, depending on where they are in the incubator. I like to keep my hatching eggs on the top shelf, or my pipping and hatching set on the top shelf of my hatching time. But everybody's different. I do actually also have a nurture right that I will use as a hatching box, and I have a very old right hatch that I've never actually tried to hatch eggs in, but it does a fantastic job of holding the box nice and tight, and it's like 30 inches by 30 inches by like 5 inches tall. So I just line it with puppy pads, put a little food and water in there, and then usually I'll put my lockdown eggs in there. And that's been great, because then I'm not opening my hatching time and I'm not messing with the humidity of the other eggs that have yet to hatch. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to do this. I don't even think I'm really going to film it, but I'll show you in a sec. Big thing is make sure that you don't really get his head too much, or if you get his head a little bit, make sure that you don't get his little beak. Some folks will use a toothbrush for this. I just use my fingers. Yeah, back in a second. Put that down. And all right, I'm gonna try to film it. Probably gonna wind up dunking my phone, but that's okay. Here's a little chicky licky. I don't know if it's gonna focus. Remember we said we're just not gonna get his little beak, right? So we're gonna go in here. And any of you that have ever had a baby, right? You kind of, when you wash a baby, you gotta be gentle hands, but vigorous scrub, if that makes any sense to you, if you understand what I'm saying. Same basic concept. Just like a baby, you're gonna wash away from his eyes. I said don't get his beak. If you splash water on it, that's fine. We just want to make sure we don't... Oh, shoot, I'm not even on the camera. We want to make sure that we don't submerge him. And we're going to get him all nice and rinsed off. Usually, when my fiance has hair, she will take him from here. Sometimes, especially if it's cold, she'll take him up and give him the old spa treatment with the hair dryer. I don't do that, but she likes to do that. And then the result, when you do that, is that you get... the fluffiest chick that anybody's ever seen. So here we are, freshly dried, looking moderately perky. Yeah, He says, leave me alone, put me back in the incubator. I think he's going to be okay. He's pretty stressed right now, but I think he's going to be okay. Just to demonstrate, this is what breast chick looks like when it's floofed. So much floof. And there's just a couple more of them in there too. So here's the follow-up on the shrink-wrap birds. I haven't looked in here yet. So, as expected, we had this one that did not go. I moved that one. But everybody else is good. So, good for us. And now we do have this one that was still trying, and now we're gonna have to help this one out. But everybody else is good to go.